Thank you, Hassan, for your kind introduction. I want to start by thanking you all for being here at the very last session after lunch, the very last day. I want to thank Dr. Ahmed for allowing me to be part of this very prestigious panel on natural resources. I just want to, just a word of caution. I mean, I've assisted to the labor session on the first day, and unlike the labor theme, which started in 93 or 94, we launched this program only in 2010, so 5 years ago. So we're still very young compared to the labor theme, but we managed to achieve a lot in 5 years. So I've had the pleasure to collaborate with Ibrahim over the past 5 years in co-managing this research program on natural resources and economic diversification. The rationale behind it was really to better understand how these economies that are oil-rich function and how come with all the wealth that they have been blessed with in terms of reserves and production. They hold around half of global oil reserves, a quarter of natural gas reserves. They control around a third of global oil production and 14% of natural gas. Yet despite this considerable wealth, these countries have not yet managed to achieve sustainable growth, diversification, and prosperity. So the objective of this session is mainly to describe the key research questions that we addressed in this research program, and also highlight key research findings in 3 areas. We did quite a bit of work on understanding and avoiding the oil curse, and which I will be presenting today. Ibrahim will be showing some research findings on oil growth and development. Jeff will be presenting the finding of a project on political and macroeconomic institutions and macroeconomic management that he has led for us and is almost complete. And we really hope by this presentation by the 3 of us to give you a flavor of some of the work that we did over the past 5 years, and actually get your feedback on what's missing, what's good, and what's bad, and what we can do in the next phase. So these are the key research questions of the program in general. I mean, has the Arab world avoided the oil curse? How effective are monetary and fiscal institutions in shaping macroeconomic outcomes? To what extent do political institutions affect macroeconomic management and outcomes? What is the role of oil in conflict in Arab research economies? And this is a fairly new project that's launched this year, and we're very excited about it. What's the impact of fracking, the fracking revolution, and the shale gas discovery on global and regional energy markets? And this project just ended last month, so the papers should be out really soon, and they have some really useful policy implications as well. So just to take stock over the past 5 years and a bit, or 6 years, ERF has completed 6 major projects with 7 smaller projects in the pipeline. We have already 44 working papers, 1 edited volume published by Cambridge University Press, and should be hopefully out in the next month or so. And I've had the pleasure to co-edit it with Ibrahim, and had a very good group of researchers who have contributed to the volume. We have organized 3 workshops, 2 policy conferences, and 3 training workshops. So now I start my presentation. I mean, first was just an overview of ERF's work. My presentation actually draws on the book, which I showed you a while ago, and also a particular chapter that I co-authored with Shahir Zaki. He's not here, but I mean, it was some of the slides really draw on that chapter, so just to give credit. So this is the outline of the presentation today. We'll focus on oil and macroeconomic outcomes in resource-rich Arab economies. We introduced the concept or the notion of the political curse rather than an oil curse, and then perhaps some policy implications on how best these countries can avoid the curse in the future. So like I said in my very first slide, the Arab world is oil wealthy. I mean, I've showed some figures or indicators of reserves and production, but this is an indicator that I very much like. It's rent per capita. And we can see that the GCC is significantly wealthier than other groups, which I'm going to explain the different sets of groups, but I mean, throughout the presentation, I try to bring out 2 different stories, the GCC story and the less wealthy the story of the less wealthy oil-rich countries like Algeria, Syria, Yemen, and Sudan. We believe that they have really different symptoms, different amounts of wealth, and perhaps different development paths as well. So just this is the graph to show you the enormous differences in wealth. And that, like Qatar has a rent per capita of $190,000, and if you compare this to the poorest, which is Sudan, it's only $31,500. So, just to start on a positive note, I mean, oil has been a huge blessing for this country, for this region, and it has enabled them to significantly increase their income per capita. It has led to dramatic improvement in their human development indicators, whether it's education, life expectancy, mortality rates, and I don't think they would have been able to achieve this progress without their oil endowment. However, I mean, even in the absence of a counterfactual, there is the sense that maybe they have not done enough, or at least they could have done better. So the literature, there is a very well-established literature on oil and development, and the early literature would tell us that oil arguably could lead to growth volatility, limited diversification, and Dutch disease, as a result of Dutch disease, and that would create a rentier state that maintains authoritarianism, and that line of thought is really has been pioneered by Biblawi and Luciani, and later on further illustrated by Ross. So, however, that's the early literature that has evolved over time, and then there's new evidence showing that poor development outcomes depend on weak institutions and governance. And that's, I think, the main message that I will try to make throughout this presentation. It's not really an oil curse, it's really a bad governance curse or political curse. So just to give you, this is just to summarize, when I said at the beginning, two different groups, two different stories, the GCC, there is considerable oil rents, and these rents translate into growth volatility, some growth volatility. I mean, I'll show you the figures later on. This group exhibit a lot of more volatility than the other group, but the main illustration of the curse, or the symptom of the curse that's really apparent and specific to this group, the GCC, is really the labor market and the segmentation. Oil rents is so significant that it actually translates mainly through public sector jobs and other significant welfare spending. And these channels have been used to increase government legitimacy and regime stability. For the less wealthy populous economies, this group has experienced the most devastating economic symptoms of the curse, like Dutch disease, low investment ratios, and even violence. I mean, all of them, Algeria, Sudan, Yemen, and Syria, at some point in their history, since the discovery of oil, they've experienced some sort of conflict or violence, and not the GCC. So to go into more details, I mean, when I said go back to the channels, I said that oil can lead to growth volatility. So this graph shows us indeed that natural resource rents are positively correlated with the volatility of growth, and countries with large resource dependence, like Kuwait, like Qatar, like UAE, and even Sudan is an outlier here, but most of the GCC countries with significant oil rents have exhibited overall negative and volatile growth, and that's derived from the higher exposure to oil price volatility. The second macroeconomic mismanagement symptom that would seem to be derived from oil is the limited diversification and Dutch disease. I will not spend a lot of time on this because Ibrahim is the expert here on this, but we can see over time that the GCC undertook diversification efforts over time, not all with the same intensity, but if you look at the graph, look at UAE in the 70s or 80s, it almost did not have a manufacturing sector. In the 2000s, it has been able, that yellow bar, to create one. Bahrain has a manufacturing sector of around 15% of GDP and it has been able to maintain it over time. However, if you look at Kuwait, it has been able to maintain it too, but it's incredibly low. The manufacturing sector is around 5%. However, what's really troubling about this graph is the other group. The other groups, all of them, Algeria, Sudan, Syria, unfortunately there was no data on Yemen. It shows that with the discovery of oil, the manufacturing sector has just shrunk over time, which could be a symptom of Dutch disease, but we'll let Ibrahim illustrate on this further. And even for those countries who have diversified over time, I mean, we can see from this graph that they still have progress to make, as only Bahrain, the size of the manufacturing sector is optimal. For the rest, I mean, they can still do better. The political curse. Oil and the rentier. I explained the rentier state concept. Oil would actually provide the means to buy political consent, to repress opposition, and slow down democratization. Like I said earlier in my first slide, oil rents in the GCC in particular has been distributed to nationals through public employment and generous welfare. And if we look at the table, wage and salaries are very high as a ratio to GDP. Subsidies and social benefits, the same thing. If we go here, we can see that these are just the share of nationals in the public sector, and they're very systematically in all GCC countries. Most of the nationals are employed in the public sector, and a limited share is employed in the private sector. On the repression channel, defense spending is usually very high, and these are WDI data, and probably underestimated. And then on the political curse, I mean, we know the concept, no taxation, no representation. There is, taxes are very low in the GCC. Look at Kuwait, it's around 1% of GDP. Oman and Bahrain, 3%. And usually when there are no taxes, it's very difficult for citizens to demand accountability of their rulers. So the GCC have undertaken, I mean, just to confirm this idea, the GCC have undertaken limited political reform since the 70s. According to the Freedom House indicators, no Arab oil-rich economy is considered free, except Kuwait, which is, it's partly free, but still not free. And in most cases, these extractive institutions have predated the discovery of oil, and this is what has made oil mismanaged. So I think institutions are the true culprit here. However, I mean, we did some regressions with, in my co-author chapter with Shahir, and even though institutions are significant, but it will take a considerable improvement in the quality of political institutions to offset the negative effects of oil rents. Incremental or marginal improvements will not yield the desired effect. So avoiding the oil curse. I think the elephant in the room here is really political reform. The literature has shown, I mean, recently over and over that resource-rich economies with a high degree of political inclusiveness and strong checks and balances can turn the curse into a blessing. So it is really time for the Arab world to start rethinking about adopting meaningful political reforms, accountability, and checks and balances. Perhaps, who knows, that the declining oil prices would provide an opportunity for more reforms in general. On monetary institutions, I mean, monetary institutions need to be strengthened in terms of independence, in terms of enabling them of becoming counter-cyclical, in terms of improving the transparency of monetary policy conduct, to facilitate accountability of central bank targets, and perhaps targeting a competitive real exchange rate which can promote non-oil exports and more generally support or promote diversification away from oil. Reforming fiscal institutions, I don't want to be stepping too much on Jeff's toes, so you have a lot to say about this, but fiscal institutions in terms of having effective sovereign wealth funds, fiscal rules are are important to induce higher savings, better short-term stabilization, and there is preliminary evidence of countercyclical fiscal policy in the crisis 2008 and 9. Now is, with the current bust in oil prices, now is the time to see how the GCC governments are going to behave. As a second best, in a context of limited accountability, it's important to promote some more transparency about resource management. Initiatives like the EITI or National Resource Charter are good initiatives. I have 2 slides left. Hassan. Long-term sustainability and savings. This is really important, especially for the populous group, which is still suffering from severe infrastructure deficits. So sovereign development funds rather than sovereign wealth funds can finance infrastructure projects or investing, and I'm stealing Paul Collier's concept. He wrote us a very good chapter on this in the book, and finance also diversification from oil, and he actually estimated that for the populous economies, because they have short resource horizon, they would have to save 50% of their hydrocarbon fiscal revenues, and this ratio would need to rise to 100% by 2043. The GCC, because they are wealthier and they've already started investing, they would need a 30% savings ratio starting 2013, and which need to rise to 100% in 2083. Another important thing for the GCC is actually their employability in the private sector. Many countries have already embarked on very serious nationalization projects. Saudi Arabia is one of them. But what we know is that nationalization alone is not enough, and there is a need to improve the quality of education of nationals and skills to increase productivity growth, as TFP has been declining over time. Finally, my last slide. Just oil is a true blessing for this part of the world. We all want more of it, even us in Egypt, who send, I don't know, only around 1 million workers in Saudi Arabia. So it's an opportunity for development and prosperity. Oil has definitely contributed to better standards of living. It has widened their set of policy choices, yet their performance can be so much better. We believe that the curse is more related to institutions than oil, even though there are political and economic manifestations, and just that there are 2 sets of countries, 2 different stories, and different paths of development. And I'm done, but before I'm done, I want to wish all mothers here a happy Mother's Day.